Hello, and welcome to Inspire Me 360. I'm Barbara McBain. In today's episode, I want to be talking to you guys a little bit about the concept of heaven, or finding inner peace and bliss. This is one of my favorite topics, and certainly something that I think is a quest or a goal for most individuals here on planet Earth. In terms of finding bliss or finding heaven, or that concept of heaven or nirvana, what does that really mean, and how can we integrate this into an applicable real world concept, something that we can integrate into our daily lives, especially the way that so many of our cities are set up, or just society in general. The way that we live is not necessarily conducive to a super peaceful, tranquil lifestyle, unless you're a Tibetan monk that's up in the beautiful hilltops. How do we find and how do we integrate that tranquility in the midst of so much perceived chaos and really stark contrast in terms of duality? So what I've learned along my journey is that more and more I seek out a very peaceful, calm way of living, and that is my home frequency. That's where I feel safe. That's where I feel the most alive. I'm the most creative, and that's where bliss really starts to radiate from my being. When there's a lot of chaos in my life, I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy the bumpy ride anymore, I think is the best way to put it. Now that's not wrong or right. Everybody is in a different stage, and the stages and the journey, that's sort of the fun part. I mean, that is the quest, is to find oneself and to figure out really what is the equilibrium that brings balance into your life, and where do you feel safe and where do you feel at home. And that is really what the concept of heaven is about. It's about finding that balance within yourself and finding that home frequency. So really finding that inner balance and finding where your home frequency is. And when I say home frequency, of course I am talking about the very unique frequency that each and every one of us was made from, or what we are. It is the song of our soul, is a good way to put it, but it's just really where we are perfectly aligned with what we are in our unique essence and with our creator. Once that finds a balance point, that's where we really become extremely powerful. And I don't want to use the word powerful incorrectly, because again, actually the story of Aladdin is a great way to teach this concept. When the Jafar, the evil advisor to the emperor, when he finally gets this immense power, so his wish to be all powerful, and he just becomes this super dark entity, and he's just creating all of this chaos. Again, is that allowed to exist in our universe? To some degree, yes, but also to some degree, no, right? Because the more powerful polarity that exists is the polarity of light and love. So it is what makes creation possible. So anything that is creating or extending can only create in light and love. That is the only way things materialize, is through that light love energy. So anything that is deconstructing, or is living in that, or is existing in that negative polarity, is actually not particularly powerful. And you will find that anything that is in the service to self and the negative polarity can only gets its power from consuming others, or consuming things for itself. But it's in and of itself, it's generating nothing. It only consumes, kind of like a black hole. Like in the same way that it appears that a black hole is consuming the light, cannot destroy the light. Even something as dense as a black hole, if we think of something like a black hole, it actually doesn't destroy the light. Eventually, the light is actually expelled very powerfully from it. And just like a black hole, just like someone that is really polarizing negatively, when we think about heaven specifically, or creating heaven, or what that is, that's coming into alignment with our home frequency, that core of our soul. And then from that point of knowledge and purpose, starting to then take or walk into our power, the power of creation, and starting to make manifest the most beautiful enactment of the play of our imagination, if that makes sense. So what I've found specifically in my journey here in this incarnation is the more miraculous things kind of start to pull into my world, they will come, and they will come with greater frequency and intensity and beauty, the more positively calibrated my thoughts are to the totality of everything. That is sort of that point where you start to bridge your distance. So again, a lot of scripture talks about meeting God, that, you know, you have to be able to meet our source, our creator, halfway, and that's exactly true. If we think about the dimensions as well, and in terms of cycles, God resides in, or source resides in a dimension so far above the third dimension that God's consciousness cannot filter through, the power of God cannot filter through all the way down to the lowest density. I mean, it can, but his power at a certain density only delineates to the lower densities through his light workers. So God can only meet us halfway. So our consciousness through our chakra system can move very eloquently up towards the seventh dimension in the way that our consciousness currently functions. Beyond that, it's the best human word that I can come up with. It's inconceivable. We cannot conceive thought forms or conceptualizations beyond the seventh dimension with our sort of primal consciousness. So the way that we are able to unite with God, or commune with God, or resurrect, you know, ascend to that point, we have to be able to raise our consciousness and our awareness enough so that if we want to converge with the energy that is our source in its totality, so that we can understand not all that is, because again, that's a very, very strange concept. All that is ever expanding. It's infinite. So we can't really even ever talk about all that is, because it's not something that the rational mind can conceive. I remember being very small and trying to figure out that complex problem, you know, trying to conceptualize eternity and forever and all that is. And I was trying to get my brain, you know, the physical material construct that I was transmuting the information through, to basically compute that concept. It was not possible. And so I had to surrender to the fact that there are things that I cannot articulate and conceive of in a third dimensional body. For a long time, it bothered me very heavily because I felt the need to know it. I felt the need that I very deeply wanted to know what was beyond that. What I realize now is that we will know it, and we will be able to conceive it once we have bridged our energy with the very powerful source energy. And that is our purpose. you know, we hear a lot about a concept called the harvest. This is something that is very new agey. A lot of it comes from people that have channeled different entities that claim to be here to help guide mankind and humanity. Again, I don't make any claims to know what is right or wrong, or whose message is the most correct, or what is the perfect way, because when we claim anything as perfection or an absolute truth, or when we start to preach and not teach, because the difference between teaching and preaching is a teacher knows they are only as good as the information that they have in the moment, and a good teacher also knows they are also a good learner and an avid learner, and they should always be learning. So they are able to impart the energy that they have synthesized and collected and do the best to spread that teaching, or basically teach the teaching the way they understand it, but not to preach it as better than, or not to use it as a tool of division. Because when we start to preach and we start to utilize information that we have as a tool of division, saying my information is better than your information, so therefore you are inferior, so therefore I can attack you, that is not in the accordance with absolute truth or divine love, and so therefore is a distortion of the actual pure message of light and love. So again, when we talk about our home frequency and really settling into the balance point of our journey, you'll start to know it, because again, that is where your bliss point will be. That's going to be where you're most creative. You'll tend to also find in your home frequency that a lot of things that calibrate with joy will start to just kind of pour out of you, whether it's music or art or dancing, poetry, writing. That's really where you will find the sort of sweet spot towards what you're meant to create will come from that home frequency. Now, again, this episode is about creating heaven here on earth. So how do we bridge that gap between that which is in our imagination that we want to manifest in our three-dimensional world? How do we actually bring it down and anchor it here in 3D? And it's all vibration. It's all about the way that you present yourself to the world and what you actually are in truth. Because again, you have to think, there's a lot of people that will put on a false bravado, or they will act a certain way, but internally that is really not where their core frequency is calibrating. So it's really all about authenticity. So really hitting this point of pure bliss, nirvana, whatever you want to call it, is about being completely authentic to who and what you are, being in total acceptance of who and what you are. Again, you know what, we sometimes try to stuff ourselves into a certain type of box, which is maybe dictated by society, maybe dictated by our families, maybe we grew up with a certain religious background, and we're sort of trying to force this, all that is spirit, that really is us, into sort of these constraints. And when we constrain ourselves in any way that is not in accordance with our home frequency, or is not authentic to who we really are, we start to become distorted, and we start to get irritable or frustrated. And it's just really a sense that, and a knowing within, that we're really not on the right track. And we have to push through the mechanism of fear to become that which we are meant to be. And that's really what is meant by finding your own heaven. When you get there, it's a place of absolutely zero fear of persecution, zero fear of judgment, zero fear of attack, because you actually are protected. When you are living this way, you're living in accordance with divine law, meaning that you are living out the totality of your spirit without the residual effects of a fear-based distortion. How can I put this in human terms? So let's say, even talking about what I'm doing right now, okay? Teaching about the principles which I know to be true. I could reside in fear and worry about what the external world might think about how I'm teaching or why I'm teaching, or perhaps I have ulterior motives. We could even take it into a darker place. Maybe people watching might think, oh, this is against a book I've read or a religious book or a set of religious teachings. This has to be bad. Well, here's where, again, authenticity comes in. I know that nothing I'm saying would ever or should ever cause another human being to attack another. I'm only teaching unity, I'm only teaching love, I'm only teaching expansion. All of those things calibrate towards joy, bliss, happiness, and a protection for all beings. If we take that even to a more expanded view, and as you grow with me, continue to watch, I will explain again how so deeply I feel connected to the natural world, to the animal kingdom, to the mineral kingdom, plant kingdom. So again, when you really start to anchor yourself into the beauty that is planet Earth, and when you really start to want to protect our Mother Earth and protect the consciousness of humanity, you'll realize that any dogmatic teaching that actually incites an attack on another person, a judgment on another person, or any kind of persecution is absolutely not calibrating with the light and the love. So the teaching, therefore, we must be intelligent and intuitive enough to know that that teaching has been distorted. It probably was not originally presented in the way that it is now written. And we also have to be intelligent enough to look back through history and understand where the distortion points came into the teachings. And often they did through the monarchies. So a lot of these groups of individuals that were rulers of the land, that wanted to accumulate mass wealth and control the population, were the ones that would distort the message or distort the teaching so that they could gain control over the masses. And they did this, which, again, is very clear why they did it, because again, if you can put a population into the state of fear, they're more easily controlled. Now, I don't want to also, with that statement, create a bunch of vigilantes that want to go out and attack people or attack those that are in the elite. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not an attackist. I'm a lover, not a fighter. And what I mean by that is that the most intelligent way to win any battle is really through mind, is really through a peaceful and powerful example. Is the best way that I think I could teach that. It's not about being above others. It's not about necessarily being in the spotlight. It's not about being praised or sought after in any way. However, if you have a platform to speak, and if that is something that becomes manifest for you, then you must do it if it is authentically within your being to do so. If it is something that you feel is right in the moment and you must use the power of your voice or the power of the word, then that is the correct thing to do. And you must utilize that power without the distortion of fear, because anytime we are walking in the distortion of fear, we will not feel grounded, we will not be within our home frequency, and we will not be doing our divine work. And I'm going to take this a step further. So the greatest fear that any being in the third dimension ultimately has is the fear of losing the body, or the fear of death. So the most egregious form of attack that we can understand here on planet Earth would be murder, would be the taking of another life. So if we think about the negative polarity, so that extreme negative polarity, I know we talked about this in earlier episodes, a little bit in this episode as well. So the negative polarity must take, it must consume to gain its power. So a very, very extreme example of this would be a serial killer. They gain their power, or they gain their thrill, so therefore they energize through taking the lives, calculated taking and consuming of another life. Now, again, that is a very, very extreme example that we will see manifest here in the 3D. That again is something that would be very, very scary for any living being to obviously live through. If potentially you were on the other side of the coin there, if you were in the negative polarity and you were the one doing the consuming or doing the act of attack, it still must be understood. And you still have to, even the most extreme of the negative polarity would be highly intelligent. You would have to have a lot of planning to be able to conduct that sort of operation and that extreme of an attack. And so that's what, and that's, I think, why even in popular culture and in media, we find that extreme of the negative polarity so fascinating, because again, just like I was saying before, the negative polarity does have an intelligence to it. There is an intelligence there. Just like the positive polarity has an extreme intelligence, where the light, and again, these terms are very difficult in the English language, but where the light will always win is due to the expansion factor. Because darkness has to consume, it really is creating nothing. The light is dominant and more powerful exponentially and always due to the fact that it is the creator. It is the creation force. So therefore, it is more powerful just by default. That's also why, as human beings, we don't have to worry about it. There is a galactic universal dance, absolutely, between light and darkness. And as I said before, that was an agreement we made when we created the universe in duality. However, to find that balance point of peace within yourself, please know that it is not your responsibility to fight as either a dark warrior or as a light warrior. There's no fight. It is just a dance. It is just a beingness. So be authentic to what you are and put down the distortion of fear once and for all, and let what is in the process of manifesting become the beautiful play that it is, and find peace in it. And that is part of the ascension process. I know I was speaking with a friend earlier this morning. We were talking about the mythology of Medusa. So we all know the story of Medusa, the wicked woman with all of the snakes, slithering out of her skull. Now, that is such a perfect metaphor for what I'm really talking about. Now, whether that depiction was of a feminine entity or a masculine entity, it's the same message. When we have thoughts that are permeating from our mental consciousness that are like snakes or like darkness, or they're constricting to our soul, of course there is a certain ugliness that will manifest, okay? And is that ugliness or is that distortion scary? Of course it is, because the thought forms that we are creating from our consciousness are scary, distorted thoughts. So how do you turn Medusa into Venus? Essentially, you just remove one by one, like, plucking the weeds from your garden, remove those types of thoughts from your consciousness at all. And so you probably are saying, oh great, this is wonderful, remove them. Well, how do you do that? Okay, so I'll explain a little bit the process of how you're gonna start to pay attention to your thoughts and your thought forms. So let's say you have some crazy thought about, I don't know, jumping off a balcony, some stupid thing, some movie you watched at some point, and now this thought just cannot get out of your head. Okay, and I'm going to use a very personal one because, again, my great grandma actually jumped out of a balcony, so it's always really stressed me out. And I thought, my God, because somebody in my family actually did that, committed suicide that way, what if that is like something that's within my DNA? It's always kind of freaked me out. And then I've had some issues with different scenarios with heights. Now, one thing that I've noticed is that your reality or your perception will improve when you start to unthink those thought patterns. So how do you have thought pattern interruption? Myself, when a thought form pops into my mind that I feel is a little bit distorted or scary, which starts to kind of create anxiety, I'm going to not attach anything to that thought specifically, and I'm going to roll a phrase over that thought. So I'm going to have constructive, creative, verbal dialogue within myself. So again, go back to that scenario where you get that kind of mental flash and a little bit of weird dialogue about something you find distorted and scary. I start reciting poetry or talking about things that build me up and make me feel very strong and powerful and centered. I start to talk with my voice, the voice that we can all hear talking in our head, over whatever that other program that's running in the background has popped into my consciousness. And I've noticed as I start doing this, I become the dominant force. The I that is within me starts to become the dominant force that is directing all that I do. And as you become a little bit more learned and a little bit more practiced with this, you'll notice that you can really eradicate any thought that crops up just by deliberately using your internal dialogue. I'm going to take this one step further. A lot of teachers teach that the ego is something that needs to be put away and put down, and it's, bad ego, like a bad dog. Now, I'm going to teach this from a little bit of a different spectrum, okay? I understand it, and the way that I have channeled the information is that it is a very, very precisely calibrated tool that we have. That inner dialogue, or the egoic mind, is actually a feedback loop that we can utilize to harness the power of our consciousness through a third party or a third person that is going to help us delineate that information in a very calculated way. And when we start to utilize the ego as our friend, as a tool, and not trying to jettison it out of our existence, that's where it becomes extremely powerful. So how I utilize it again is by direct verbal communication. I have started to take command of it, and I utilize it only for good. So it's only going to be a feedback loop, because of course I am in control of the program that I'm running. I'm only ever going to utilize it to speak in the highest denotations of information. So I'm only going to use it for love. And again, it takes practice. I'm not going to tell you that this is going to happen for you in a week. It's probably taken me over 10 years to be able to really take the reins of my ego and my egoic mind and that feedback loop and direct it so that I am in control. And I'm still not 100% in control of it. There's times when it gets irritable, there's times where it gets offended, all sorts of things. But these moments where I step out of my equilibrium, I am so attuned to the way that my body and my mind function that I can watch it and I can see what this learning mechanism is doing within my own construct of consciousness. And I can kind of give it a little slap on the hand and say, stop that right now. It's not purposeful. Whatever it is you're doing is taking you off track. It is taking you into the land, I call it no man's land, but the land of distortion, and it is decreasing the calibration of your vibratory field. And once you understand the science of it, it becomes very easy for you to never feel frustrated and never feel irritated. Again, let's say you planned this day perfectly, everything is supposed to go according to plan, and then utter chaos breaks loose within your three-dimensional reality and nothing is going your way. Maybe your tire blows out, you're supposed to get to the meeting on a certain time, you're half an hour late, and then, some other crisis happens. What I've started to realize about the quantum field and the universe is the universe is always working towards your highest good and towards your highest purpose. So anytime something happens that's a little bit magical, chaotic, mystical, strange, not what I expected, it's always the biggest gift. So I've started to realize that when the roller coaster sort of starts to go up in terms of a little bit more turbulence, a little bit more chaos, that's when the ride is just about to get good. That's when you start to hit your sweet spot and you let go, throw your hands up, and basically just buckle up, but in a very positively calibrated way. Here's another thing that I really want to talk to you guys about. It's the difference between fear and excitement. Fear obviously being a lower calibration, a very low thought form, and excitement being its partner, or the duality principle between the two. Excitement is always going to feel blissful. It's always going to feel energizing. It's always going to be expansive. Whereas fear, the distortion, so the incorrect teaching or the opposite of excitement would be fear, which is going to be decreasing. It's going to make you feel small. It's going to make you contract in terms of your energy field. So once you start to understand this, you really can watch how you move through life, how you move through your relationships, how you move through different events and incidents within your own existence and within your own life. I'm going to cut it short on this video because, again, I don't want to overwhelm you with too many concepts, but if there's anything that you ever have a question about, or a certain scenario, or something's frustrating you, relationship stuff, whatever it is, put it in the comments below. I will do my best to answer it for you as quickly as possible, because again, the sooner we can solve the problems and get out of that victim mentality and feeling like we are free falling with no control, the sooner you will really be able to tap into the law of attraction and the manifestation that's available for you in each and every beautiful moment. So thank you so much for tuning in, and again, have a blessed day.